Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. All praise is due to Allah, and Allah's peace and blessings be on the last messenger of Allah. This evening's topic is really the Muslim world in turmoil. We see in the news today, this past week, past months, a variety of different revolts taking place in what is known as the Arab world, the Arab portion of the Muslim world. And there's a generalization concerning the turmoil which spilled over into Afghanistan earlier and into Iraq and has spilled into other areas like Somalia, etc., Chechnya, etc. As Muslims, it is important for us to understand the forces that are at play. Of course, what the media presents is oftentimes a mixture of fact and fiction. It is agenda-based and tends to promote the most negative possible images of the Muslim world. We are in an era known as the era of Islamophobia, where studies done in the UK in the 90s, the Running Aid report, substantiated the feelings or the position which was held by the Muslim community that Islamophobia was in fact in operation there in the UK and in many parts of Europe and elsewhere. Islamophobia being a fear of Islam, an irrational fear, one which really doesn't have a textual or political base, but one which has been created either by the media, selling newspapers, creating viewership, or by political figures in different countries in order to divert the masses in those countries from the real issues facing them, political issues, economic issues, etc., to have the masses focus on an element in the society to be, in fact, the point at which people may assign blame to this element in the society, the Muslim element, as being the source of their woes, their problems. We can see that in recent times with the wave of banning of the hijab, the Muslim headscarf, the khimar, across Europe, beginning with France, spreading to Germany, Belgium, etc. Niqab, the covering of the face with the veil, something which in the past Muslims had worn. Muslim women, a very small fraction of Muslim women wore, and nothing was said, but out of political convenience, it became a point of attack. What we hear coming from the political figures of Europe and elsewhere is that they want Muslims in these countries as a minority to integrate. In fact, what is really wanted is to assimilate. so that the Muslim loses his or her identity, that they become indistinguishable from the common citizens of the society. Their religion is something secondary, which they're not denied, but what is primary is that they are citizens of the country in such a way as to be indistinguishable from other citizens who are not Muslim. However, the teachings of Islam require Muslims to distinguish themselves, require them to be Muslims first. Anything else after. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't be productive members of society, but they are Muslim productive members of society. This, we could say, Islamocentric view is something which is not new. It is not the result of recent movements, etc. This is an ancient view. It is a view founded in the Quran and founded in the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum," whoever imitates the ways of a people is one of them. He, with that statement, underscored the necessity of Muslims to distinguish themselves in whatever circumstance, whatever society they find themselves in. Whether they are the majority, they have distinctive ways of dress, character, principles, etc., which they stand by, regardless of changes that may take place in elements or parts of the society, or even on a world scale, where, for example, the recent changes which have taken place in the West with regards to homosexuality, for example, where in the 70s, after being considered from the perspective of psychiatrists to be an illness, a mental illness, and which was treated with a variety of different treatments, whether shock or chemical, etc. treatments, it became acceptable in the 70s. And the illness of homosexuality was replaced by another known as homophobia. That is a dislike of homosexuality. So one who disliked it, openly rejected it, considered it to be improper, etc., such an individual was now considered to be ill. He needed, or she needed, to see the psychiatrist, to be reprogrammed, to accept this, what came to be known as an alternative lifestyle. This movement for the homosexual movement spread throughout the countries of the West, to the point where not only were homosexuals to be accepted, but their way of life had to be considered commendable. And those who opposed, as I said, were labeled as homophobes. The church, the Christian church, for example, which had, based on teachings of the Old Testament, they held that this was something sinful. This lifestyle punishable by death in the Old Testament. The Protestant church changed, in many cases, changed their positions. And they moved along with the changes in perception held by the societies of the West. So we ended up with even homosexual ministers and heads of churches, homosexual churches. Now, Catholicism has basically held its ground, but from a low-key perspective. And Islam has not cowered and lowered its head in this regard. It has stood firm. Those countries which have made Sharia law, Islamic law, the law of their countries, like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Sudan, and others that have made it the official basis of their constitutions, it is inscribed, enshrined in their law codes that it is considered to be a sin, punishable by death, as adultery is, as murder is, it is punishable. So this now has become an issue over which, for example, myself recently visited Germany in March of this year, and while I was there, I gave a lecture in Hamburg, a public lecture, which was legally permitted, which was on Islamophobia, the problems that Muslims face in terms of dislike of Islam, which is spread across Europe, etc., and how to deal with it. At the end of the lecture, 17 Germans accepted Islam. However, on my way back to the hotel, I was surrounded by a German SWAT team, taken to headquarters, and was read a document from the mayor of Hamburg, which stated that I would be banned from Germany for life. Why? Because, according to the document, I advocated the death of homosexuals. Well, I was not giving lectures calling people to go out and kill homosexuals. But they said, there is on YouTube a lecture by you in which you did state this. Well, it was a lecture which was in defense of Islamic law. I was explaining what Islamic law was in a variety of different instances and explaining the logic and the rationale behind it. That's all I was doing. I was not calling and inciting people to go and kill homosexuals. In fact, I've spoken very strongly against people taking the law into their own hands. However, as it was stated to me and in the document, that homosexuals were an important part of the society there, and I represented a threat to their existence. Therefore, I would be banned forever. This is the overreaction which is taking place. For a person to hold the beliefs of Islam has now been considered a threat in and of itself. I mean, this is the extension of Islamophobia. Islamophobia is also a product of an overall struggle which exists on a world scale between the Sharia and what is known today as secular democracy. Secularism in particular. Secularism being a belief, a political system in which the role of religion is removed from the various spheres of education, economics, political expression, etc. Religion is taken out of that sphere altogether. Whereas Islam, based on the principle of Sharia, holds that religion should influence all aspects of life. That is the basic Muslim belief. We do not have a tradition of separating what is called church from state. Church and state is one. So, from the Islamic perspective, Islam should govern education, economics, politics, all the various aspects in countries where Muslims are ruling. Where Muslims are a minority, then of course it is not possible for them to implement the Sharia. However, again, a fear has developed in America, for example, where a number of states have banned Sharia. Most people, the politicians who have been involved in this, if you ask them what is Sharia, they really don't know. To them, somehow it's synonymous with terrorism. So everything is now related to terrorism. But in fact, Sharia, for you to ban it, it means you're banning Muslims from practicing Islam. Because when a Muslim prays 5 times a day, he is implementing the Sharia. When he or she fasts the month of Ramadan, they're implementing the Sharia. When they make Hajj, they're implementing the Sharia. So the Sharia governs all of one's life to the degree that they're able to practice it. So this move to ban the Sharia is actually ludicrous. As I said, most people don't really even understand what the Sharia really is. So this is really what is at the bottom of much of the turmoil that we're seeing in the world today, especially concerning the Muslim world, where the values of secular democracy have dominated most of the world. The communist system, which at one period of time was in opposition to the capitalist system, is also secular democracy. India, the next largest body of people, they adopted secular democracy as a way of ruling their country. And for Muslims living in multicultural societies like India, secular democracy is in their favor. It's not a bad thing in that respect. However, the imposition of secular democracy on the Muslim world represents something else. Because it then comes into direct conflict with the Sharia. Most Muslim countries today have, in fact, adopted some form of secular democracy, and that is the norm in most countries. However, the concept of Sharia remains preserved among the Muslim scholarship, in the Muslim scholarship, among Muslim scholars. They are unanimous in holding that Sharia remains a valid principle for Muslim life, and that where Muslims are able to implement it, they are obliged to do so. This is based on the statement in the Quran, for example, La hukma illa lillah, that judgment and rule belongs to Allah alone. Or where Allah said, قُلْ إِنَّ صَلَاتِي وَنُسُكِي وَمَحْيَايَ وَمَمَاتِي لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Say, indeed, my prayers, my sacrifices, my living, my dying are for Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. That a Muslim dedicates his or her life to Islam, to doing what is pleasing to God as defined in the Quran and the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we have these forces at play on one hand, and on the other hand, we also have in many Muslim countries dictatorships where the rights of people are abused and the population is suffering under the crush of this evil rule. And the people eventually exploded. In Tunisia, a man set himself on fire, and from there spread to Egypt. The rulers of Tunisia and Egypt, Tunisia left, Egypt stepped down to Libya, to Syria, etc., that we're hearing now in South Yemen, etc. That response by the people was really and is really a response to oppression of the masses of people. Oppression which did not actually have any direct connection with forces opposed to Sharia, but simply autocratic rule where leaders abused their countrymen and women, taking the wealth unfairly, giving the wealth to Western powers in a way which the society suffered, etc. So the removal of these dictators was really an attempt by the people to find some form of redress, some form of normalcy in their lives. They were living under very terrible circumstances. In many of these countries, if a person were seen to oppose or to speak in a way which was against the government, these people would disappear. They couldn't be found. Their families would never hear from them or about them again. This was not unusual. So this type of situation, after years of this type of dictatorship, these countries have exploded. But that explosion is not specifically an Islamic explosion. It is just a reaction to what exists or what existed in their countries. It's what it has done at the same time, though, it has removed some of the barriers and, we could say, political oppression on Muslim parties, where Muslims wanted to be a part and parcel of the rule of these various countries. The well-known Islamic parties were suppressed. Their leaders were jailed. People were murdered, etc. So with this revolt, the ban on these parties have been lifted in most places. So Muslim figures, well-known figures, politicians, etc., have now come out in greater force, their voices now being heard, etc. However, in general, these revolts are not guided by Islamic principles. So many of the hopes that people might have, we here looking at Muslims over there, might wish for them, will not or probably won't be realized. Because there are other forces at play that don't want to see this turn into an Islamic change in the society. This Western civilizational enmity towards Sharia and in effect becomes towards Islam represents the desire to implement the ideals of Western civilization, secular democracy, on the rest of the world. Samuel P. Huntington spoke about this in his Clash of Civilizations. Though I don't necessarily agree with everything he said in the book, he did identify a point of clash. Does Islam want to fight? Want a military clash? No. This is not what Islam teaches. It doesn't encourage it. However, if Muslims come under attack, they will fight back. Where they're able, they will. However, Muslims in the past, where they dominated large segments of the world, they didn't force their belief system on the populations that they ruled. Muslims ruled Spain for some 700 years. The majority of Spaniards did not become Muslims. Many of them did, but most did not. Muslims ruled India for 1,000 years. The majority of Indians remain Hindus. The belief system of Islam was not forced upon the people of the country. So it is not the Islamic way to automatically enter into direct conflict with other civilizations or other belief systems, etc. Not to say that it didn't necessarily happen sometimes, some places, but it was not the norm. So the Islamic way was more live and let live. However, Western civilization today doesn't want to give Islam a chance. Not Islam which is practiced properly. What they would like to see, and what is commonly now referred to as moderate Islam or liberal Islam, is in fact what we would call nominal Islam, where a person is a Muslim only in name, but he or she doesn't really practice or adhere to the principles of Islam. A person who strictly adheres, piously adheres to the principles of Islam, such a person is now labeled as an extremist. This is an extremist. And this is what Muslims are faced with today. That to stand for Islam, to speak out about Islam, means that you're now open to be labeled as an extremist, calling to extremism. So, some 8 months ago, also, in the UK, I was also informed that I was banned from the UK for 3 years. Why? Why was I banned from the UK? Well, because I said in a lecture given in 1996 on Sharjah TV, when I was questioned about suicide bombing, I said at that time that it may be considered a military tactic, meaning that there is such a thing as a suicide mission in military terms. So we don't necessarily blanketly say it's all wrong. Of course, this was at a time when the Palestinians in fighting against Israelis would climb onto Israeli troop buses and blow themselves up, killing a number of Israeli soldiers or put themselves next to these troop boxes and blow themselves up doing this. So it was directed at Israeli military. However, this escalated and went against the population later. And Palestinians were going into restaurants, into supermarkets, airports, etc., and blowing themselves up. At that point, I spoke out against suicide bombing. That this was in fact haram, forbidden in Islam. Because this is now directed at civilian population. This is now terrorism. It is terroristic acts. And I spoke many lectures after that on it. However, all those lectures were ignored, and only one lecture where I said it may be considered a military tactic. You, Bilal Philips, are calling to terrorism. So, banned for 3 years. The United States have also banned. Why? Because you are an unindicted co-conspirator for a bombing of the World Trade Center back in 1993, an attempted bombing. Okay, well, what is an unindicted co-conspirator? Well, unindicted means that you haven't been charged for anything, because we don't have enough evidence to charge you. But we consider you to be a co-conspirator because either we saw you shake the hand of a person who we ended up arresting later on, or he came and embraced you in the mosque, or your name ended up in his phone book. So you are guilty by association. You are now a co-conspirator. So, I'm banned. When I wanted to come here before, you remember back in July, I was invited down to come and give a lecture, and I was surprised when I got to the airport when they informed me. They said, "Sorry, sir, you're on an American no-fly list. You can't even fly over American airspace." Oh, interesting. You know, and same thing, banned in Australia. I've been going to Australia, done many lectures, all recorded, nothing for my lectures. Why? You're on the American blacklist. Therefore, there must be something wrong with you. Dangerous character. So, banned from Australia. Well, you know, in the end, of course, it's not really that critical for me as an individual, but it does represent a trend. A trend where people who actually have a moderate voice, myself who has lectured all over the world, have consistently lectured against terroristic acts, spoken against Osama bin Laden and what he represented, and all those who call for unleashing violence against society. But all of that is ignored. It doesn't mean anything, because I am a person who also says you Muslims should be Muslims. You're supposed to be a Muslim first. Whether you're a lawyer, you're a doctor, you're a student, you're a Muslim student. Meaning that you must live your student life according to Islamic principles. And these principles are sound, morally sound principles. Similarly, you're a doctor, whatever position you're in. As a Muslim, there are guidelines for whatever profession you're in. So I'm saying, people, you need to know who you are. If you are to worship God, as He has prescribed for you to worship Him, then you need to know your religion. You need to find out, you need to learn about your religion. We have, in the basic, you could say, bag of Islamophobia, a variety of accusations that are leveled against us as Muslims. Most of them focus on women. So, you would not be surprised, don't be surprised to hear, if you go outside of Guyana, you know, in the West, somebody points the finger at you and says, you Muslims, who mutilate the genitals of females, you're female genital mutilators. You may ask, well, what in the world is that? What is this creature known as the female genital mutilator? Well, in a part of the Muslim world, in Egypt, Ethiopia, Sudan, Somalia, they do practice, some among them do practice, a form of female circumcision, which is in fact genital mutilation. It's something which Islam is opposed to. 110%. However, these people, this area, they practiced it even before Islam came there. And that's why it's not surprising to find that the Christians in Egypt also practice it. Christians in Ethiopia, Christians in Sudan also practice it, because it was a practice of that area prior to Islam. However, it has been associated now with Islam, so we are labeled with that label. So though in Guyana here, nobody's going to call you that. They're not going to speak about female genital mutilation because unheard of. Most of the Muslim world never heard about it, not involved in it. But that becomes the label. Honor killing, another thing. Honor killing, found in Jordan, Iraq, Turkey, Pakistan, where the head of the family or the members of the family find that usually a female member has dishonored the family by having some form of extramarital affair or relationship not sanctioned by Islam. So they believe that it is necessary for them to purify the honor of the family by killing her. So the father, the brother, the uncle, the son, they conspire, capture, and murder her to purify the honor of the family. And in these countries, because it is a practice known, the punishment in the law is very light. They may get a couple of years, whatever, jail time. But in Islam, is there such a thing? Is there such a thing as honor killing in Islam? No. Murder in Islam is murder, punishable by death. You kill somebody, whether it's your sister, your mother, your daughter, then you are to be executed. That's all we have in Islam. But we have been associated with this now, honor killing. So don't be surprised if you're overseas and you get into discussions with others that this finger will be pointed at you, that you practice this practice. So we're faced with a variety of false labels, false attacks, which are a result, as we said before, of media exploitation. It sells papers. The truth oftentimes is not very exciting. So these false accusations become front page news whenever these things happen. So this is the situation that Muslims are faced with around the world. And what is the solution? What do we do? Well, on one hand, we do have to be involved in the media. We cannot run away from the media. We do have to participate and try to bring our belief, our concepts, our correct image to bear on the media. Of course, many of the writers, etc., reporters will not be interested. They won't write it the way we say it. But not every reporter is biased. You'll find among them some who are fair, and they will try to express our views properly. So, such people we give them support, we encourage them, and utilize them to present the correct image of Islam in the media. We have to do this. You know, that's exactly what happened to me actually in Denmark before I went to Germany, where the Muslim community was afraid of the media, completely afraid. They didn't want, they invited me for a lecture, they didn't want the media even to come into the lecture. They banned them, barred them from entering the lecture hall. I told them, really, we don't need to do this. This is not really good. We should allow them in. Let them record. It's good when they all come. Because if there are discrepancies, etc., it will appear in print. This one will claim this was said or whatever, the other one will claim, no, it wasn't. It was something else. So to expose, you know, those papers, etc., that like to distort the image unfairly. So I encouraged meeting the press, but the community, fearful of the press, because we know Denmark is where they have the cartoons, you know, cartoon pictures of Muhammad Sallallahu, you know, attempted assassinations with people involved, bombing on the newspapers that published them, etc. So it was something of a volatile type situation. However, I told the press, and on my way to doing the lecture, I would speak to them afterwards. I would give them the full opportunity to ask them whatever questions they wished. And sure enough, after the lecture, which was on Islamophobia, I talked to them. I allowed them to ask all the questions they wanted. They recorded it, they put it in print, etc. And what showed up in print was very positive. They were saying, oh, this person's falsely accused. He's not really saying these things that people are claiming and so on and so on. They made a very positive picture of Islam in the paper, and they even sent TV crews down to the Islamic Center where I was to interview Muslim Danish converts and the community and myself and so on and so. And it was a media success. And the brothers and sisters, they were shocked. How? Why would they write something positive? No, they've never been doing it before. But the point is that Muslims had always been running away from them. And of course, people feel if you're always running away that you have something to hide. Must be something wrong there. So if they can't find it, they make it up. So, of course, as Muslims, as I said, we can't run away. We have to meet the press. Also, politically, Muslims have to be involved in the political process. They cannot run away also from the political process either, because decisions are being made on a political level that will affect the Muslim societies, whether they're in a majority situation or a minority situation. So where they find candidates that are openly speaking out against Islam, and other candidates that are moderate in their speech and are supportive or whatever, then they support by voting for the moderate ones who would appear to look out for their interests. I mean, it is necessary for Muslims to be involved in that process, because if they don't get involved, and then the party leaders or parties that come in that have very negative attitudes towards Islam and get into power, then Muslims for not voting are at fault. They brought it upon themselves. So this is something necessary as a strategy in order to deal with part of the problems that we are faced with today. However, here in Guyana, where we are not faced with some of the issues that I spoke about, Muslims in Europe and elsewhere are facing, we do have our own set of problems. There is turmoil within our own society right here. And the turmoil does rest on the same issues that exist externally, but it just manifests in a different form. There is a culture, a legacy of what we may call cultural Islam, which dominates the true teachings of Islam. as such, people, not knowing really what Islam is, end up doing things which are against the very teachings of Islam. This ignorance is widespread in the society. Actually, it's not just here, it's widespread across the Muslim world today. And as a result of the ignorance, a number of negative expressions or negative practices have emerged. Among the evil ones that we may find here is the challenge of universalism in Islam, where all Muslims are one. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. The believers are one brotherhood. And like the verse we heard our young Qadi recite, that Allah speaks about dividing humankind up into nations and tribes to know each other. This is part of the variety of life, to see Allah in His creation. Not to despise each other, because in the sight of God, in the sight of Allah, the most noble are those who are in fact the most God-fearing, the most pious. However, when the knowledge of Islam becomes weak, people revert to tribalism. Tribalism, which manifests itself as a form of racism, which has now entered into the Muslim society here and elsewhere, where people are looking at each other from the perspective of Indian Muslim, African Muslim. No, in Islam it's just Muslim. Yes, your roots may be from this place, or your roots may be from someplace else, but in the end, we all came from Adam, and Adam came from dust, as Prophet Muhammad had said on the farewell pilgrimage, where he called the pilgrims together and he told them that there was no superiority of an Arab over a non-Arab, of black over white, white over black. That the only superiority lies in closeness to God, fear of God, love of God. This is where true superiority lies. Everything else is fake, it's false, it's evil. So it's so that Prophet Muhammad had said concerning tribalism, "Da'ha fa'innaha muntina." Give it up, because it is rotten. It eats away at society. It destroys the true bonds of brotherhood, of faith, of humanity. So Islam is opposed to this way of thinking. And if you look back in history to Spain, we spoke about where Spain was ruled by Muslims for 700 years. If we go back and look to see why did it crumble after 700 years, you will find that as Muslims strayed away from Islam there, tribalism's ugly head rose. Distinctions between Arabs and Africans, etc., appeared. Arabs taking hold of the more fertile areas, the major cities, relegating African origin rule to less fertile areas, minor cities, and were not a single Muslim, and you were allowed to remain in Spain. Everybody else. That was the consequence. It is destructive. It is against Islamic teachings, and we do need here in the Muslim community to weed it out. We need to oppose it, not support it. We need to know that this is in fact displeasing to Allah. The Messenger of Allah spoke against it, and Islam, Muslims will never succeed as long as it remains alive and present amongst them. So, the Muslim world in turmoil. The general assessment is that ignorance has spread to such a degree that Muslims don't really know what Islam is. And as such, they have engaged in a variety of activities, whether it's in the name of terrorism, whether it's in the name of honor or whatever, which are against Islam, and keep them down because they cannot rise to play the role that they should in human civilization. 1.5 billion people have something to say, but it can't be heard because it's muffled by these ignorant practices that have become common in our Muslim lands, in our Muslim communities around the world. Alhamdulillah, in spite of all of that, the picture isn't a gloomy picture, because we know in the last 30 years there's been an awakening, a spread of knowledge, correct knowledge, authentic knowledge about Islam has begun. So we find the wearing of hijab something which 30, 40 years ago you could hardly see anybody doing it in different parts of the Muslim world itself. Now it has become common. This is an obvious symbol. But it is more than that. The rise of Islamic banking, for example, where Muslims basically had submitted themselves to the interest banking system and just accepted it as it was, and dealt with it in a way which is of course prohibited in Islam. Alternatives were developed. Islamic banking, which was scoffed at in the beginning when the Muslim economists were proposing Islamic banking. The Western economists were laughing at them. This is ridiculous. Banking without interest. This is something ludicrous. You're going to fail. There's no way that it can succeed. However, today in Harvard University, there is a chair for Islamic banking and economics. Major banks of the West, Citibank, Bank of London, etc., have what they call Islamic windows, where they're offering the same Islamic economic banking products that the well-known Islamic banks are currently offering. So this is all a part of the awakening. So the future is bright, but it requires our own efforts here to know Islam, to understand it correctly, and to apply it in our lives correctly. It is this widespread ignorance which drove me ultimately to establish the Islamic Online University. In order to make authentic knowledge about Islam available on a global scale. Within 4 years, the Islamic Online University went from 0 students to 45,000 students. From 199 different countries. The figures which were quoted were earlier figures. These are the current figures. 199 different countries. There are only 203 countries in the world. Meaning that this university, in its simplicity, offering courses for free or tuition free, has become the university with the most diverse student body of any university in the world. The biggest of the known internet universities, online universities, University of Phoenix in the US, its total countries from its students study there is around 70 to 80. Even Medina University, where students come from all over the Muslim world to study there, they have reached about 90, something like that. Islamic Online University has reached 199 different countries. Countries whose names I never even knew existed. Why? Because, first and foremost, it's free. Everybody loves something for free. So it's free. Secondly, it's primarily for Muslims, though we have non-Muslims studying on it also. Primarily for Muslims. And Muslims are everywhere. Everywhere you go in the world, you find them. Just this last summer, I was in Toronto visiting a good friend of mine there, Dr. Abdullah Hakim Quick, and he had just come back from a trip to the Northern Circle, the Arctic Circle, where he had visited the mosque, which is the farthest north of anywhere in the world, inside of the Arctic Circle. And he brought back images, PowerPoint presentation, showed me of Eskimo Muslims. Allahu Akbar. Muslim Eskimos. Didn't think we'd hear about them. But that's the reality. Islam is spreading virtually everywhere. And that's what gives it that huge, diverse student base. Anyway, the point is that this is an opportunity for you to learn about Islam free or tuition free if you're in the BA courses. Diploma courses are all free. You're welcome to join and to learn Islam correctly, so that the overall situation of Muslims here in Guyana can change. The motto of the Islamic Online University is changing the nation through education. That this is where real change will lie. When people become educated to know really what Islam is, then they can live lives in accordance with the teachings, and it will be productive lives. They will play a positive role in the society. They will not be known for drugs and other, evils, because this Islamic society holds as its highest goals human moral values, establishment of morality in society. The Prophet ﷺ had said, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I was only sent to perfect for you the highest of moral character traits. And he said also, Al-Bir husnul khuluq, righteousness is good character. And we hear that echoed throughout the teachings of Islam, whether in the Quran or in the Sunnah, the statements of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even the Salah itself. The prayer, 5 times daily prayer, Allah says there in the Salah, tanha anil fahsha wal munkar. Salah prevents evil speech and evil deeds. It is supposed to change our behavior. But it doesn't. We have to ask ourselves, why doesn't it? Why are we still speaking evil and doing evil? Why? Because we're obviously not praying the prayers which were prescribed. We're praying our own version. One in which we are unconscious of really what we're saying and what we're doing. We're just going through the motions. The custom, the tradition. And of course, that type of prayer will not change anybody. Ritual will not make anything better. Where ritual is combined with understanding the goals of those rituals, then it can bring about change. So, as I said, the future is not dim. It is bright. The knowledge of Islam is spreading. More and more people are becoming conscious, aware of it, trying to practice it. You find more young people in the mosques today. Go back a few years, and the mosques were empty. Only old people were there. Only old people went to Hajj. Only old people practiced. Young people felt to live a happy life, enjoy, do all the things that are not allowed. When you get old, then you become pious, you pray to God, forgive me. You die in that state. Of course, we now know that such a way of treating religion is error. It is of no use. Religion that way is not really religion. We're playing a game with God, and we can't fool God. So, in closing, I would just like to remind you that we do have this duty, which Prophet Muhammad enshrined in his statement, Talabul ilmi farida ala kulli Muslim, seeking knowledge is obligatory on every Muslim. Knowledge of both the religion as well as knowledge of the world in which we live. The best of us, as the Prophet ﷺ said, خَيْرُ النَّاسِ أَنْفَعُهُمْ لِلنَّاسِ. The best of us are those who are most beneficial to people. So Muslims need to return to that role in society, becoming beneficial contributors to the overall growth, development, and progress of society here in Guyana. I pray that Allah, God Most High,